are you? That's the question I want to talk to you about today. Now, when I asked that question to an audience in New York recently, somebody shouted out, "I'm a Texan!" Now, there is a person who knows who they are. Who are you, and what is it that you're bringing to the table is really the topic of this conversation. I thought I knew who I was. And if you had tried to even give me this talk 3 years ago, I would have been like, I totally know. But I had this moment a couple years ago that really changed my understanding, and I'm going to share it with you now, as painful as it is. About 2 years ago, I was in the process of shutting down a company I had built. And I had built it from this itsy-bitsy little fledgling thing to this multi-million-dollar firm that had defeated Microsoft and had done a series of other things, profiled in the Wall Street Journal and stuff. But after 11 years, it was time to shut it down. So the staff was gone, and the things I was facing every single day were things like, how do I get rid of 20 staplers? Because everyone knows that when you're building up a company, there's all sorts of things that are going on, but when you're shutting down a company, the oddest things that you have to pay attention to. And staplers just became my nemesis. Like, they just kept coming out of drawers everywhere, and after a while, I was like, why do we have these staplers in the first place? And to say I was blue is sort of underestimating it. It was one of those times in my life where I had felt like I was really a failure, because there's something about shutting something down that seems really limiting. And so it was most days I woke up and I thought about all these operational issues and legal issues and tax issues and stuff. And what I wanted to do every day was to go put on my pajamas, grab a bag of Lay's barbecue potato chips, and hide in bed. But I was invited to a party, and it was a girlfriend who was launching her second book. By the way, doing a book is like having a child, so you don't not go to someone's book launch party. It's kind of a big deal. So I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to kind of pull myself together and go to this party. And as I'm standing in a crowd, a little circle starts to form. And introductions start to go around. I'm so-and-so of the Wall Street Journal. I'm so-and-so of Apple Computer. I live in Silicon Valley, by the way. I'm so-and-so of Google. And it was muckety-mucks. And as I'm coming around, it's becoming my turn, I feel like I'm in an Alice in Wonderland scene, where I've taken this pill, gone down the rabbit hole, and people are much, much taller than I am, and I have shrunk. And I stuck up my hand and I said, I am nobody. A couple friends were there who chimed in and said, she's written a book and she's done a couple things in her life. But I heard myself for the first time really hearing something I hadn't heard before, and it was one of those moments where I had hoped I'd had the magic lasso and I could kind of rope those words back in and kind of reel it in and say, oh, you didn't hear that. I didn't hear that either. Didn't ever happen. It got me thinking a lot about what defines us. Is it about the externalities of situations? Is it about the fact that you're from Houston? Is it about the fact that you might have a great title, lead a brand, have a great business, wear great bow ties? Is it about externalities, or is there something inherent to each person that is actually happening and manifesting its way through the titles and the jobs and the bow ties and the Houstonness that we are? In business today, I see this play itself out where I see admins being ignored, being told they don't count. And by the way, I was one of those admins. My first job at Apple Computer was as an admin. And I'd always go to the meetings like so excited, able to contribute, until everyone ignored all the admins. Later on, when I helped companies do this thing to solve really, really strategic problems, what I'd say is, and by the way, just to set up context on this, so there were companies that had been failing. They had missed a major product launch. They were missing a major market opportunity. It was always bad by the time we walked in the door. They typically tried to solve it themselves for some period of time. And then they had tried to solve it with like a McKinsey or Bain or somebody, and that had failed. And so by the time they got to us, it was sort of desperate times. And we would say, let us include people, anyone in the organization to come participate with us. in solving the problem. I'd call it an invitation to play. And the leader of the business, whether it was a business unit owner or a CEO or the board or whatever, would say, oh, no matter how desperate we are, we're not that desperate. And I'd be like, invite the customer service rep who listens to the phone call, invite the admin who hears what issues are going on, invite the sales rep who isn't making his number, and have them help us understand what is the problem we're facing today and how could we solve it. And undoubtedly in one of those rooms, about 3 or 4 weeks in of good listening, of being attentive to one another, there'd be this moment, and it was always come from sort of the nobody in the room. And everybody would be like, that's it. And together they would move forward. And today in the marketplace, I see this happening in a bunch of really interesting ways. Let me give you a couple examples of how I see nobody's really changing things. Fold It is an online website doing the oddest thing, doing protein folding, sort of showing DNA sequencing and how it folds. And when the team that was originally creating this application idea, they said, well, maybe there's some PhD students in India and China and other parts of the world who could contribute in their off time and help us understand this. And when we get this research codified, we'll be able to accelerate our learning. So we should crowdsource it. We should open it up to other people. And a year went by, and a lot of people had participated around the world, and they were thrilled at the results. They went back to find the very best protein folder in the world. Anyone know who it was? A British nurse. Was that what somebody said? Thank you. Do you remember what she did for a living every day? She was an admin during the day. Somebody that would have been vetted out of the system had she first had to have been picked and deemed appropriate. Patients like us, how many of you guys know that example? A bunch of friends, one of them being a brother, ended up getting Lou Gehrig's disease, and they were working with the doctor one-on-one and realizing that the actual flow of communication was incredibly slow, and that this guy was going to essentially die before they figured out the solution. And they said, what if there's, and they were emailing all around the country with friends saying, what treatments worked, what phase of the disease are you in, et cetera, and trying to patch together information. And they realized they could actually open this up and allow everyone to participate. And of course, this is the opposite of how power works in the healthcare system. The healthcare system is designed around, there's a doctor that knows everything, and a patient who is the recipient of that information, right? The patient is the nobody in the case, and the doctor is all powerful. And patients like us just said, how about we share amongst ourselves what it is we're trying and doing and what's working and what's medically working and what's alternative therapy working and what our families are saying, and create a community. And what happened was researchers kind of locked onto this and said, oh my God, sharing works. Sharing will allow us to accelerate the rate of innovation. Sharing will allow us to actually learn better. And of course, the understanding amongst that group was just how much community was actually created in the process. These nobodies became incredibly powerful in the way in which they shared. TEDx. TEDx is a perfect example of a bunch of people having power in a way that they didn't have before. TED, 5 years ago, was a conference that was a couple thousand people total in the world at 2 events. And today, 3 years after they opened it up and said, maybe some people might like to get together once in a while and curate their own ideas that matter, with incredibly passionate curators, by the way, and bring together their community of people. And in that process, 3,500 events like this have gone on around the world. Nobodies, invisible to the system, that were brought in because of platforms, because of openness, because of transparency, because of crowdsourcing. Now you could look at all that and say that's a technology solution that's solving all that. But actually what's happening underneath the technology solution is that anyone, quite possibly everyone, has a role to play. Not because they are chosen, not because they are vetted, not because they are perfect, not because they have a great title, not because they are powerful in the way the society deems them powerful, but because they have value to add to the system. The thing that the people are doing at that moment when they're saying, I want to contribute, they're owning something that only they can bring. Their perspective, their vision, their talent, their creativity, their oddness, their Houstonness. They're bringing something that only they can bring. And each of us actually is standing in a place that only each of us stands on. It's a product of all of our history and all of our forward vision. It is both the light and the dark. Just in the same way that the musical keyboards have white and black in order for it to work, we too bring a combination of all our sadnesses into the story as well as our strength. And the sadness turns out when we have the brother who has the disease, that is source. When we have an opportunity to actually bring out issues that matter to us, troubled issues about divisiveness. If you saw the research earlier, right? A lot of people who think some people should be this way and should be this way, bring that issue to the table. When we celebrate onlyness, we do something absolutely amazing, I think. We allow each of us to be seen. And it takes us sort of standing in that space and seeing ourselves as worthy, as seeing ourselves as powerful, and able to contribute to whatever we can. And people will see that because the models that are allowing value to be happening in the world are changing. The people who once said, like in the venture world where I live, in the venture world, the best venture capitalists still say to this day that they invest based on pattern recognizing. Pattern recognizing, by the way, means for them, let me translate it for you in case you don't speak VC. Pattern recognizing means I invest in 23-year-old Stanford graduates who are white male. Right? Which is why when we do pattern recognizing, we have entire constituents who are left out of an economy. We have women represent less than 9% of board seats and less than 20% of the stages in the world, although this stage is kind of interestingly, beautifully diverse. We have entire populations of people who have been told, I am nobody, and they have come to believe it in whatever way that they could. And so I want to ask you, who are you? Who are you? What makes you so unbelievably special? Not just in what you do and not in the titles that you accumulated and all the accomplishments that you've already had, because surely that is true. But what is it that calls you into this world? And how can you bring that out so other people can see it? I came into this story talking about how I am nobody. Of course, I'm not nobody, and neither are any of us. But it will take a shift in our own mindset to stop thinking about how do we fit into a mold in the world. Because when we do that, when we try to fit into a mold, what we're actually trying to do is kiss ass. And in fact, I actually think it's a really interesting problem because if you're trying to kiss ass, it's like kissing ass to a moving butt. Because you will never fit into somebody else's construct. None of us ever will. When we learn to stand in our onlyness, we actually celebrate the kick-assness that we are. And that, to me, is the key. How do we unlock that part of us that is so kick-ass and so incredibly different, and our story to bring into the world? Because when we do that, it will unlock that part of us to be more fully alive. It will unlock our organizations to be able to see us and utilize us. And I think ultimately it will impact our entire economy so that the place in which we live is more thriving. So I have a real call to action that I want you, before we exit this, and I've left 4 minutes on the table, I'm going to play with you for a minute. I want you to help me think about who you are. So I'm going to use up the clock and ask you to work with me. Who are you? Somebody help me here. Don't just leave me standing here as the clock.
I'm a Texan.
And who are you? Besides a Texan. That's a beautiful one, by the way. That was just a tee up. That was perfect. Besides a Texan, what makes you so only? What's your onlyness?
Yeah, I'm a Houstonian and I'm committed to having this community be the best community.
And who are you?
My passion is in my spare time. What I do for a living is funds and makes it available to me so I can do the things I really love to do.
And what's your passion?
Trails.
Trails.
Recreational trails, hikes and bikes, motorcycles.
Beautiful. You're going to help create that community around us, just in the way in which we can connect. Lovely. Who are you?
An explorer.
An explorer.
Always, of everything.
Oh, think about that. That's beautiful. And who are you?
Giver.
An aspiring Rubik's Cube state champion.
Fabulous. And who are you? Somebody had one over here.
Giver.
A giver. Talk about that for a second.
I just naturally love to give.
I'm trying to find you. I can't
As a
spot you.
result,
Oh, there you are.
To be blessed in receiving as well.
So a giver.
Translator.
A translator. Say more about that.
From talking to engineers and scientists and translating their ideas into something people can use in every day.
That is a very necessary role in the world. I live with those geeks. They need a translator.
A fitness and nutrition bomb.
And how is that? How are you going to play that out in the world?
I'm going to take it forward and start transforming the way people look at fitness. It's a big issue in this country.
We do. We have a real issue with obesity.
Oh, it's
Health. One in the blue shirt who was just about to, yes?
Tagging on with that, I'm an engineer who scores higher on verbal tests than math. And what I'm going to do is redesign the way we work so that it causes the people who work there to flourish rather than fail.
Beautiful. I probably have time for two more. Anybody else want to do it?
Animal lover.
Animal lover. Finish the sentence. Tell us why.
I am helping to promote the no-kill shelter movement across the United States.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And one more. Anybody want to bring us home?
I'm trying to figure it out.
And that is totally owning your onlyness too, because we all are. And Karen, you want to?
Daddy.
Daddy. That's a big one. Daddy.
And I'm a lover.
How do we bring people into the world? You know, how do we really bring people into the world that are loved and lovable and they really know it?
I have a piece of responsibility to the next generation.
Onlyness can come in mission. It can come in hobbies. It can come in small ways and in big. And it's recognizing our own story in that process of why do I care? For as long as I've worked in America, I've noticed that so many people are excluded from our economy. And I care deeply about that because I think that's the unlocked thing. And that's why I wanted to come here on stage and share my onlyness. To the degree I did it, I hope you heard it. But mostly what I wanted to share with you is that onlyness is something I want you to own. Thank you.